Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, America. You are now listening to Mikasa Sukasa, and I am your host, Niko House. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. This is our daily podcast, and I just want to say before we get started, I know that there are a lot of people out there who have some credit issues. I understand that things come up, even in my own life, things have come up. But if you don't want to wait a year or 2 years for you to be able to get that house that you wanted, get that car that you wanted, and keep those interest rates down, how about shooting an email or going to the Credit Surgeon's website? You can go to their website by literally just Googling or typing in thecreditsurgeons.com, or you can give them an email at creditsurgeons, FES, F as in Frank, E as in Echo, S as in Sam. So Credit Surgeons, FES@gmail.com, and they will be able to give you a unique and personable approach to getting your credit repaired. Now, with that out of the way, I want to go ahead and get started. So, as many of you know, regarding the Clintons, the Clinton Foundation, and just the Department of State, and really the government in general, there's been a lot of speculation. There's been a lot of denial. There's really been just a lot of delusion, and in all honesty, from one side in particular. And that side is the side that belongs to the establishment, which is the Clinton side. Now, for some odd reason, people think that this Uranium One scandal has been debunked. And I'm not exactly sure where that thought came from. Well, no, I lied. I do know where it came from. It came from establishment media lying to people and trying to convince them that the theory had been debunked. It hasn't, people. In fact, not only has it not been debunked, but I am even willing to go a little bit farther and say that there is a strong possibility that this whole Uranium One scandal will in fact lead to the Clintons being indicted. And I will even say that I'm not exactly sure that they haven't been indicted already. I know that the Clinton email investigation has been reopened. I know that that the Clinton Foundation is being investigated by the FBI in Little Rock. But this is something entirely different. And in case you didn't know, there was a bunch of sealed indictments that came down the pipeline a few months back, and one of those indictments has been unsealed. The indictment was for Mark Lambert. Now, Mark Lambert is an important key piece because he was in charge of a lot of the transportation of Uranium One, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a second. But I've already done a YouTube video on this, and I urge you all to check out my YouTube channel. You can find me by typing in Mikasa Sukasa with Niko House, or you can just type in my name, first name Niko, last name House, Niko or Housc. We have a pretty solid following there, and that was a quick rundown, and the sources are also going to be posted there as well. But I wanted to go into more detail because, well, this story has a lot of different twists and turns to it that you really have to be able to link back together to get the full picture. And so I want to go ahead and start from the beginning. So in 1992, the Department of Energy executed a 20-year deal between the United States and the Russian Federation, which outlined operations for the systematic conversion of highly enriched uranium from Russia warheads into lower enriched uranium for civilian applications. So these were going to essentially, this program was meant to take weaponized uranium and make it applicable for like nuclear power plants and things of that nature, because at that time it was believed that nuclear energy was some of the cleanest energy out there. So the Russian entity involved was actually the Ministry for Atomic Energy, and the commercial agent in the States was called USEC in Bethesda, Maryland. Now, the Russian commercial entity involved was actually called Tenex. Now, remember that name because that company is going to play a pretty important role going down the line. Now, the the first contract that was supposed to only facilitate the transport of the material to Russia and then back into the United States That was what was supposed to happen with the first contract. However, there was an additional contract that was not approved by the United States government. Now, that additional contract was called the Return Feed Program that was started in 2001. Now, which you can imagine what that means. It means that some of that uranium was supposed to go back into the hands of Russia after it left the United States, contrary to what the United States government had initially agreed upon. Now, in response to this contract, 10X opened a fully owned Russian subsidiary in Bethesda, Maryland, where it actually contracted with companies to transport lower enriched uranium to power plants in the U.S., conducting business that has greatly affected interstate and international commerce in regards to uranium transportation. Now, the guy who was in charge of all this was Vadim Niko. Now, this guy is important. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more why in a second. Now, he was actually the Pan-American director of 10X, overseeing operations under the agreement with the United States government. In other words, the United States government really is the only reason that any of this was allowed to go down, because anything that may involve the matter of national security, like highly enriched uranium being transported all over the country right after the Cold War, that would probably definitely be considered a matter of national security, right? So between 2009 and 2012, Niko actually conspired to extort a Florida-based lobbyist that had business with 10X. Remember, 10X is the Russian subsidiary. So already Niko messed up. This is the start, really, of the woes to come for the Clintons and anyone really involved in Uranium One, because they weren't the only ones. But you'll see why it's so important in a second. Now, Niko was the first arrest in this huge deal, but only really received 48 months. Seriously, he only received 48 months. Mind you, like I said, he committed several federal crimes, including money laundering, bribery, and extortion of a lobbyist. So 48 months is not that much. It really isn't even, it seems like it isn't even a minimum. But I can tell you this, and anybody who's studied law in the past can tell you this, or practices law currently. If you get 48 months as a Russian agent or agent of a foreign power that could be considered hostile, there is a high likelihood that you cop the plea. And we'll go into that in a second. Now, why is Mark Lambert important? Remember, Mark Lambert is a person who was just recently recently indicted, or at least had his indictment unsealed for the American public to see. He was he was in charge of the nuclear transportation company that 10X, which Niko, who was just who served the 48 months, used in the U.S. and abroad. Now, as many of you know, he was the one who was the same name that was recently released in the indictments that had 11 charges filed against him. Now, some of those charges included violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, conspiracy to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, fraud, and money laundering. Yeah, that is 11 counts of those charges, people. Not, well, no, actually, no. It was 11. Now, for those of you who don't know the definition or the difference between 11 and 11, 11 is a lot. That means 11 is a little bit, 11 is a lot. A lot of people out there know exactly what I'm talking about. So when you have 11 charges, it doesn't sound that bad, because you can have 11 misdemeanors, but you cop a plea and you can only get 6 months for 11 misdemeanors, depending on what the misdemeanors are. Now, when you have 11 counts, and among those charges, you have conspiracy to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You have actual violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You have money laundering. You have wire fraud. That's 11 charges. That means those are 11 serious ass charges that you are going down for. Now, Niko only got 48 months, remember that. And in 2015, believe it or not, Lambert's partner and co-president automatically pleaded guilty when he was indicted, which is really weird. That's important because, well, it turns out that Lambert's co-president actually has not served his time yet. In fact, the news that he had pleaded guilty and has not served his sentence yet is actually news to everybody. We just found this out whenever the recent sealed indictment of Mark Lambert became unsealed, which means he's been out running the streets this entire time, people. So once again, why would you plead guilty in 2015 and yet in 2018 you have not served your time? That probably means there's a good chance that you also copped a plea deal, which is probably how Mark Lambert got caught. Now, for those of you who do not know, 10X is the commercial sales arm of what is now known as Uranium One. Now you see, this is where it starts getting interesting. This is also important because the Obama administration knew that the bribing, the criminal activity was going on and did absolutely nothing about it. And that's according to the Hills report in October of 2017. So that's a huge problem too, because who are the two people or the two main fake faces and figures that we know of in the Obama administration? Obviously, Barack Obama is one of them, but probably more importantly, the Secretary of State who primarily deals with foreign affairs is the other one. And that Secretary of State was Hillary Clinton. Now, they didn't just ignore this criminal activity. They actually defended their actions. And once again, that's according to the Hill's article. And the Hill is pretty fond of the Clintons and the establishment in general. It's not very often that you see the Hill report on something like this in a fair and objective manner. It got to the point where even a lot of the establishment critics in the very, very beginning of this rediscovery of Uranium One, because this wasn't the first time this was brought up. This was brought up several times in the past, primarily by the New York Times in 2015, in a very groundbreaking article. But recently, as far as recently, the Hill was the first one to readdress the issue. Now, that means if you're following, Vadim worked almost so working for that sales arm of 10X meant that Vadim worked almost directly for Vladimir Putin, and his wrongdoing specifically started in around 2009 when Obama and Hillary Clinton took office. The Attorney General at the time was Eric Holder, and he was actually on the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States at the time that the Uranium One deal was approved. But amongst the other of the officials who claimed that they did not know that the criminal activity was going on, although Obama and Hillary at that time defended themselves. Now understand something. Eric Holder worked for Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton actually was the person who made Eric Holder the first African-American attorney general in the history, U.S. attorney in the history of the United States. Then Barack Obama made him the first African-American attorney general in the history of the United States. Now, obviously, if you were the U.S. attorney general and you were at that time the current attorney general, you are going to try and pretend as if you had no idea what was going on behind closed doors, that you had absolutely no idea that people were going to trial right underneath your nose and being tried in federal court. Come on. The reason why people are trying to claim, one of the reasons why people are trying to claim this is debunked, because they say that there were multiple agencies that had to approve this. But what they don't go on to say is that almost all of these agencies worked for Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton at some point. Like all the secretaries that were in charge of these agencies. Now, the Foreign Investment Committee is comprised of a lot of executive departments, such as the Attorney General, as we just discussed, Secretary of State, which is Hillary Clinton, the Department of Commerce and Energy, the Department of Defense is another one, the Secretary from the Department of Defense. So once again, as we discovered in WikiLeaks, all these departments, all the heads of these departments were all corporatist, centrist, pro-establishment Clintonites, essentially. I mean, even Eric Holder himself, even though he was a black U.S. attorney, don't get that misconstrued with he did a lot for black people, because that is not the case. In fact, he sided with the banks and actually even came out on national television and said that banks were too big to fail. And he got reprimanded because of that. They said, you can't say that. That's a no-no phrase. If people realize that banks are too big to fail, then they'll want to break up the banks. Gosh, I wonder why. Maybe because they're tired of their economy predictably crashing. So, but he reneged on his words after he said that and got reprimanded. And so that's just another example of how these people who did approve that Uranium One deal ultimately worked for, in some capacity, the establishment or the Clintons. And that's why they were so easy to persuade, because they have so much dirt on them. All Clinton has to do is point a finger and their careers are done, which he has done in the past. The committee also contained, just for your information, the Department of Treasury as well, along with Homeland Security. And they have to make a decision on any financial transactions that could potentially be deemed important to national security, which is why that Uranium One deal had to be approved. Now, in the initial article, like I said, the Hill did a very good job detailing the Obama administration's involvement, which a lot of articles hadn't really done in the past. Most of them focused on Bill Clinton's side of the fence, which we will discuss in a second. Now, federal agents actually used a confidential U.S. witness working inside the Russian nuclear industry to gather extensive financial records, make secret recordings, and intercept emails as early as, ding, 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 2009, once again, when the Obama administration took office. That showed that Moscow had compromised an American uranium trucking firm. I wonder what uranium trucking firm that could be. Perhaps the guy who just got his indictment unsealed by the name of Mark Lambert. Now you see how this is starting to get a little dicey. And I'm going to show you why it's important, why Mark Lambert, Meekerin, and Mark Lambert's co-president they're all very important and will ultimately lead to the conclusion that I gave you in the beginning. Now so essentially federal agents were the ones who discovered what was going on with Mark Lambert and his bribes and his kickbacks within his firm, trying to secure those contracts. Now, here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. Enter Bill Clinton. Good old bootstrap Bill. The news keeps discussing that this Canadian mining company is trying to place emphasis on the fact that the company, is based out of Canada, is when they're discussing the Uranium One deal. And they're doing this because they feel like if they say it's Canadian, then it shouldn't be considered a nefarious threat. It's not exactly what they're saying it is. Oh, but actually, ladies and gentlemen, it is much, much worse than what they are saying it is. Now, what they don't like to mention is the fact that Rosatom, which was the initial company that bought Uranium One, is indeed a Russian company, and it took over the Uranium One, which was mostly owned by Canadians. It took over that Canadian company because they have stakes stretching from Central Asia all the way to the American West Coast. Rosatom, which is what they also don't like to mention, worked directly and does work, directly for the Kremlin. For those of you who are Russian illiterate, the Kremlin is essentially the government entity that is ran by Putin. Now, many people recall the speech in Russia where Clinton received $500,000 shortly after the Russians announced their intention to acquire the stake in Uranium One. Some of you may not be aware of it, but just a short background story. Bill Clinton received $500,000 from a Russian investment bank right after Hillary Clinton and that group of committee members in the Foreign Investment Committee approved the Uranium One deal. He received that in Russia, by the way. So, however, it is also not widely discussed that they received $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation from the chairman of Uranium One between the years of 2009 and 2013. By the way, all of that was undisclosed. By the way, that clearly happened while Hillary Clinton was the head of state and during all the corrupt practices outlined above, discussing Lambert, Meekerin, the co-president, etc. Now, there is no record of this chairperson donating to the Clinton Foundation for that time period. All of these donations, like I said before, were undisclosed, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton pledged to do so in an official agreement she made with Barack Obama via a memorandum. Now, this wasn't like some verbal agreement. This wasn't like, hey, let's just shake on it and hope that things work out. But no, she had an official agreement written on a memorandum, on a presidential sealed memorandum with a presidential letterhead saying that she was going to disclose all foreign donations, and she absolutely refused to. In fact, the largest donation she disclosed was about $250,000. Now, $2.35 million is a little bit more than $250,000. I think that we can all agree on that. Now, other people with ties to Uranium One also made several donations. However, the way they used those donations to kind of shroud the fact that the chairperson of Uranium One had donated so much. So they disclosed those donations because they didn't look that big separately, because those people, they were donating that money as like their own persona. So if I was Niko, I was donating that money as Niko, and I just happened to have stakes in Uranium One. But I also have stakes in a lot of other companies, so it wouldn't look that bad. So I would donate $100,000. My buddy, who also has stakes in Uranium One, would donate $100,000. So nobody found that suspicious. However, the chairperson, and those donations were disclosed, by the way. But the other chairperson, the actual chairperson, donated $2.35 million that was undisclosed. But it gets better. It gets better. So it was really only after Hillary announced her presidency did she make the necessary adjustments to her foundation to end all of those concerns of donations from foreign governments. And that doesn't really make any sense. Like, shouldn't you have done that while you were Secretary of State? Because if you all have been paying attention to the same election coverage and same presidential coverage that I have been paying attention to, then you would know that doesn't Trump get a lot of shit because, and he should, because his kids are still in charge of the majority of his business ties. So why didn't we hear about any of Hillary Clinton's business ties while she was a Secretary of State? Because don't mistake this for 1 second, people. If you know anything about nonprofits, then you know that most, and this is an unfortunate fact, most nonprofits are in fact businesses. They are there to make the people in charge money. If you look at the Humane Society, oh God, like 0.05% of that money donated goes to the animals. Now, with the Clintons, I would be surprised if it was even that much, if we're going to be honest. But the difference is 0.05% of media outlets actually cover the business and financial corruption of the Clintons during Hillary Clinton's term as Secretary of State. But all of a sudden, it was fine. Or it's fine to cover it whenever Trump has issues, which should probably let most of you all know that there clearly is an agenda when it comes to Trump. And this really has a lot to do with the agenda that is being attempted to be served. So when she announced her presidency, she finally decided that, hey, I guess I'll stop taking those investments now. You should have did that before, especially for somebody who's going to lambast Trump. And like I said, Trump should not be trying to profit off of his presidency. But we have to treat all entities the exact same way. Now, in 2005, that same Canadian mining financier, Frank Giustra, orchestrated his big uranium deal with none other than William Clinton, Mr. Bill, Bootstrap Bill, Pimpin' Clinton. That's what I like to call him because, well, I mean, you know why. You know why. So they actually flew a private jet to Kazakhstan where they met Nazarbayev, and I probably butchered his name, so don't be mad at me if you're from Kazakhstan. Look, people, Eastern European languages are not my thing. I am not really prone on the Slavic hip languages, so don't punish me. But he was a president, and when I say president, I mean that he was an evil, tyrannical dictator. But Bill Clinton seemed to have no problem with that because what he did was actually hand him a propaganda coup with the agenda of getting him reelected despite his horrible record on human rights, a record that even Hillary Clinton actually complained about while she was in the Senate and while she was Secretary of State. So how ironic is that? But he don't care. He doesn't care. So that was what was given to the president of Kazakhstan in order for Giustra to achieve and buy some of those, achieve the purchase of some of those uranium deposits. Now, the man who flew with Clinton eventually facilitated another purchase, which Clinton was involved in, Bill Clinton, of a South African company, and he kept its name. And of course, you probably know what the name of that South African company was. That company was Uranium One. So, like clockwork, Uranium One actually started popping up companies with assets in the United States, all over the United States. Several months after the acquisition of Uranium One, Mr. Giustra donated $31.3 million to the Clinton Foundation people. And he probably, as you can guess, didn't disclose that at all. It's a lot of money for you not to disclose. Hey, but when she ran for president, when she announced that she was going to run for president, all of a sudden, hey everybody, I'm going to stop taking the money now. Of course, you got all the money you need, right? So, so soon after that, he actually held a fundraiser for Clinton. And Mr. Giustra actually pledged $100 million. Now, how they got around this is they called it the Clinton-Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative. And in that fundraiser, they actually raised $16 million from other celebrities on top of the $100 million, once again, not being disclosed by the Secretary of State to the Obama administration. Now, in 2009, Uranium One, the very company that Bill Clinton facilitated the purchase of, started to drop in stocks. And there wasn't a little drop in stocks, people. This was a 40% drop. So what that means is that the people that Bill Clinton had assisted in helping for such a very long time, my apologies, the people that Bill Clinton assisted in helping for a very long time, you know, over the course, this is total, even up until Uranium One, this is probably like almost a decade-long relationship. And it's probably even longer than that, if we're being honest, or else they wouldn't have trusted Bill Clinton to do that. So their stocks were dropping. Their company was dying, and Bill Clinton had to come to the rescue. And the reason why their stocks dropped is because, now I'm going to butcher this name too, but Zakishev, I'm pretty sure I did a pretty good job on that. It's spelled D-Z-A-H-K-I-S-H-E-V. Zakishev sounds like a pretty accurate pronunciation of that name. Hey, go ahead and give myself a pat on the back. Patted myself on the back in case you didn't hear it. I don't have a mixing machine yet, so I can't go ahead and do my clap. But eventually, when I get this down, you're going to hear me give myself a lot of rounds of applause, since I can't hear y'all do it. I know that's what you're doing when you're at home or listening to me in your car. At least I hope. If not, we got some problems. But that's beside the point. The point is, Bill Clinton's friends were in trouble. And it was because this Zakashev guy was the head of at least one of the uranium deposits of Uranium-1 and was arrested. And it was later discovered through WikiLeaks that he was part of a power play by Putin and Russia to secure control of Kazakhstan's uranium assets. Ooh. It seems like Bill Clinton might have accidentally helped somebody that was colluding with Russia. Uh-oh. So I wonder if this could possibly have anything to do with Russiagate, and that this could possibly have anything to do with the fact that Hillary randomly chose, well, not only Hillary, but the DNC, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and anyone else in the Obama administration, or anyone else who is pro-establishment, randomly decided to choose Russia as the entity that hacked the elections, even though we were actually greatly improving our relationship with Russia prior to our primary elections. Maybe, just maybe, people, you think this deal could have something to do with that? Because if you haven't noticed, and this is you got to be a little aware to catch things like this. Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, and everyone who is in their camp has had this habit of gaslighting people. What they do is every time they're guilty of something, what they say is the person that they are opposing is actually the one who is guilty of it. So like the business tie, they say, oh, he's undermining our institutions. But the truth of the matter is, Hillary Clinton wrote the playbook for undermining institutions using her business. Look at Haiti, right? Look at Venezuela. Look at all the countries that the Clinton Foundation ravaged, all the money they made from foreign investors. Look at the fact that even Chelsea Clinton was still left in charge of a lot of the affairs of the Clinton Foundation, despite the fact that she was not supposed to be, because obviously that's an issue, especially she was primarily dealing with the foreign investors. That's the biggest problem that they had with Hillary Clinton having the Clinton Foundation running while she was still Secretary of State. Now, for those of you who may be curious, the Clinton Global Initiative, which is how the foreign investors were making their money, stopped after she lost the election. It didn't stop while she was still running. It didn't stop after she thought she was going to win. It stopped after she lost because she no longer had any other favors that she could offer because that administration was no longer hers. So it's pretty clear, in my opinion, that she was using her foundation to undermine people. But she blamed Trump for this, like she blames Trump for being racist. Now, I do believe that Trump does have a strong element of racism to him. But let's not pretend like Hillary Clinton does not, with her super predators comment, with her comment, or when she like pushed the Black Lives Matter pretty much out of the room, totally disregarded everything they were asking her. Whereas Bernie Sanders actually invited them onto the stage and let them speak. Mind you, this is the same Hillary Clinton who kind of got rid of instituted along with her husband, but they both instituted and celebrated Confederate Flag Day in Arkansas. We're going to pretend like she didn't know what that meant. You know, we're going to pretend like she's silly. This is a Ivy League educated woman. So, moving on. We know that the stocks dropped at this point. So, the only way that we had to save the money that was invested, because these are Bill Clinton's friends. But most importantly, not only were they Bill Clinton's friends, but these people knew a lot about a lot of the things that Bill Clinton had done with the Clinton Foundation, with the uranium deals, things that he had done in Kazakhstan. They could snitch any moment, especially when you're talking about messing with their life savings. And I imagine that's what they probably said. They were like, hey, yo, get your wife to fix this problem, or we snitching on everybody. We snitching on everybody. We snitching on your black boy Obama. We snitching on your witch of a wife. We snitching on your pimping Clinton ass. We snitching on everybody. So Bill Clinton, of course, was probably more than happy to oblige. I'm sure it didn't take much persuasion. So remember how in 2015 that the ambassador that belonged to Hillary Clinton's State Department said that he had no idea that this deal was taking place and that it had taken place. That's kind of weird, because in 2009, while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, there was actually legislation being pushed to kill the Uranium One deal. There were several complaints from members of the House and members of the Senate. They knew that this was an issue of national security. Oh, so what you're saying is that the Clinton family might have pushed a deal that was against the interests of American national security by colluding with Russia in order to get a deal, or colluding with a company that was directly working for the Kremlin in order to get a deal pushed through involving enriched uranium. It's almost as if there's a story, or excuse me, that's a story that they pushed on to Trump so that we would not ever question whether or not the Clintons were involved in with this Russian scandal. Now, if you all want to go ahead and validate this, because I've actually said this several times, but more notably so right after the election was over and they started pushing the whole Russia conspiracy theory, you can check on my YouTube page. I said that the Clintons and Obama administration had a more lengthy history colluding with Russian and pro-Russian entities against the interests of our national security, more so than anything Trump can do. I said, of course, Trump has business ties with Russia. No doubt in my mind that Trump has business ties with Russia. I think it's pretty safe to assume that a billionaire has business ties with damn near any popular superpower in the country. But that's not the same as what they're accusing him of, in my opinion, from what they've conveyed it as. And it's not the same. You know, it's not the same because they would have indicted him already. They would have came out and said that he had been guilty, or he probably is guilty of X, Y, Z based off of this evidence. The only evidence that we have is the Trump dossier, and the Trump dossier has been disproven up, down, left, and right, time and time again. So, essentially, what we can conclude from this is that, well, excuse me, what we conclude from this is that Uranium One was initially owned by the very men that Bill Clinton helped. It was going under, and even after all the help, they needed someone to essentially ensure that they didn't lose all the money that went into it before the company went under completely. And therefore, Rosatom, which, remember, like I explained to you before, Rosatom was the company that directly worked for the Kremlin, and they bought this company. So Bill Clinton was involved, and Hillary Clinton was involved in the Kremlin buying a huge stake in our uranium, and they couldn't get this done without the help of the U.S. government. So both Uranium One and Rosatom needed the deal. Rosatom needed to close the deal for Russia. Uranium One needed to close the deal for its investors. And they used their government connections, the Clintons did anyway, to make sure that it happened. People who had already had a long-standing history of being helped by the Clintons were once again being helped by them again. And for fear of being ousted as treasonous traitors, they immediately started to shift blame during the election onto the Russian government, because the intelligence communities were actually closing in and deals were clearly being struck behind closed doors. Because, well, that's how the Clintons move. So what we are going to see, my prediction, is that the unsealed indictments, the sealed indictments are going to have a domino effect. And it's already, in my opinion, already started happening. We saw Meekerin snitch on Mark Lambert and his partner. First, obviously, his partner pleaded guilty. He still hasn't served his sentence, but in that process, and during that time period, now Mark Lambert had a sealed indictment that was unsealed. So that's 3 people, and it looks like we're literally working from the bottom to the top with a government right now who hates the Clintons. Now, why is this important? Because some people may think I hate the Clintons, or I'm not a Democrat, or nor am I a Republican. I'm actually independent. I align myself with progressives, if that's what you're curious about. But more so, I align myself with the truth, and I will always do so. This is important because it is about damn time we start seeing our government be able to hold elites accountable. We went from Nixon cheating, possibly cheating during the election from the Watergate scandal, and, being forced to resign. That forced him to resign because he was going to be impeached for cheating, for even having the perception of cheating during the Watergate scandal. To this, literally colluding with the enemy, using your business for profit, etc., etc., etc. And people are like, there's no way in hell that they're going to be able to get prosecuted for this, that they're going to be held accountable for this. People are losing faith in their government institutions. They're losing faith in their institutions of justice. We're losing faith, most importantly, in the process. And once that happens, well, there's really only one other option that we've seen in the past, and that's usually revolt. And so if we don't want to get to the part where people start revolting violently, we have to restore faith in these institutions, and we have to hold the people who have had the strongest and longest history of violating these institutions. We have to hold them accountable, and we need to have it done in the public eye so that people can believe that the system works. Because that is the only way the system is going to work. That's the only way that people are going to want to participate in the system. And that is the only way we do not damn the future of this country. So yeah, I want to see them in jail. I want to see them in jail tomorrow. Because as a veteran, I know for a fact that just with the email scandal, if there was a private who accidentally sent not even a top secret email, not even an email that had any implications on the outcome of someone's success on a mission or its failure or someone's life, if that was sent out accidentally, they would be taking a trip to Camp Lejeune. It would literally be a matter of how long the sentence was. There would be no arguing. It would be in a court martial. It would be carried out almost immediately, and it would be really a matter of semantics at that point, because he is going to jail. Like, he was going to Camp Lejeune, or she was going to be in Camp Lejeune. I've seen it happen to 2 of my friends, and the intent of their actions was, as usual in law, the intent of their actions were deemed unimportant. It's, did you do it or did you not? Okay, you did it, you're on your way. So the fact that we cannot hold Hillary Clinton accountable is just once again another example of why we need to restore faith in these institutions. And this is, I think it's being gone about the right way. There are plea bargains clearly being kept, promises being made, and saying, hey, if you do this, you won't have to serve that long, man. Just go ahead and rat this person out. And politicians are rats. They're not made for jail. They love their lavish and easygoing lifestyles, which is why they've become politicians. So, with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Remember, like I said, if you think even if your credit may be pretty good, but you want to take it to the next level, go ahead, visit thecreditsurgeons.com or shoot them an email at creditsurgeons, FES, once again, that's F as in Frank, E as in Echo, S as in Sam, at gmail.com. And they'll go ahead and get you all squared away. And definitely you'll clearly be helping out the show as well, as they are one of our affiliates. So thank you all so much for listening. Tune in tomorrow for our next daily podcast. And always remember, ladies and gentlemen, find your balance. Peace.